Thank you, Karen. Appreciate the introduction, and I very much appreciate the opportunity you've given me to participate in this webinar this morning. As Karen indicated, I'm a commissioner on the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. I will talk a little bit later on in the presentation about what the Commission is doing. I will also note that we've basically wrapped up all of the work, our work, and our report will be released to the public next week. Since it has not been officially released yet, I'm not at liberty to discuss the exact recommendations and details of the report, but instead I'm going to try to give you an overview of what the Commission has looked at, how we have conducted our work, what some of the things we have been thinking about while undertaking that work, and then conclude with a discussion of what perhaps are some next steps. Okay, so maybe I'll just start with a basic discussion of kind of the history of evidence-based policymaking in the country. And I think it's, for most people on the phone call, I'm sure you recognize that we have a long history in which the government is interested in producing data on the economy and on the people in the country, as evidenced by the very fact that the Constitution includes a clause requiring that we conduct a census every 10 years. We've seen a growth in the amount of information that we collect over time. The federal statistical system, as we know it today, has roots that go back to about the mid-1800s, and in most instances, Congress created agencies in an effort to monitor and collect data on the parts of the economy that agency was considered overseeing or a part of. Obviously, we have the principal economic indicators that we collect currently, measures of employment, unemployment, prices, productivity, GDP, and others produced by the BLS, BEA, and Census, for example, are certainly essential inputs that government officials seek to make more informed decisions about both fiscal and monetary policy, and other things, and other aspects of the economy, and other efforts they make to improve the economy. And to take a somewhat different example, as I'm sure most of the people on the phone call know, the Department of Agriculture conducts a census of agriculture every 5 years, along with an annual survey of agriculture and numerous other programs that are used to construct indicators of the state of the agricultural industry and the state of rural America, so that we can improve existing programs and create new programs designed to address issues confronting the industry. We also have a fairly robust history of large-scale sort of social science demonstration projects to evaluate the effectiveness of various government programs. Certainly back in the mid-60s and 70s, my background is in labor economics, and there was a fairly famous study in that time period on income maintenance experiments and focusing on understanding how income transfers affect how much labor the house is supplying to the market. Another example, which has received a lot of attention in recent years, is the Moving to Opportunity experiment, which was a 10-year project carried out in the 1990s that tested the effects of rental assistance and housing counseling to help low-income families move from poverty-stricken urban areas to low-poverty neighborhoods. These projects that I've talked about were big-budget, random clinical trials that took years to carry out and involved collection an extensive amount of survey data on participants. One of the things that I think we've grown as a profession to understand is the government does collect a fair amount of information through the administration of programs. That data, that administrative data, can be used to continue to examine the effectiveness of government in ways that are sometimes can be done a little quicker and with somewhat less money, although, to be honest, perhaps not as robust in terms of the accuracy of the information. So, for example, my own work, an example drawn from my own work, considers studies of the Workforce Innovation Act, or WIA, which is one of the largest, or the main federal workforce development program in the country. back about 10 years ago, or a little longer than that, the Department of Labor was criticized by the General Accounting Office for not having studied WIA. So they launched two types of studies to examine the effectiveness of WIA. One, a study that I was involved in to use administrative data to study the effectiveness of WIA, and then to the cost of about $1.5 million, and we were given a year and a half to do the study, and then a much larger, what they call gold standard random control trial, which cost about $23 million. We completed our work with the help of the Department of Labor. We were able to get data. We asked for data from all 50 states. We were able to get data from 12 states, completed our project in the time period. It came out about the time that former President Bush was leaving office, as former President Obama was coming into office, and examined, using non-experimental methods, examined the effectiveness of the WIA program. The larger scale study was launched approximately the same time, and we have still not seen the results. Those results have not been released publicly yet. And so while it's clear that that both types of studies are important and for providing very accurate information about the costs and benefits for the average participant in a study, the random control trials are important. I think a lot of very valuable additional information can be generated from administrative data, and I think part of what we on the Commission have been trying to focus on is that both play a role, and that the access to administrative data is an important component to our understanding of the effectiveness of both the programs and the long-term effectiveness of government. I think everybody agrees that government will always need relevant, high-quality, and credible evidence to evaluate the effectiveness of the government and the programs. Evidence can and should be used to generate to help policymakers make decisions about policies, about effective policies, about whether we want to continue existing policies, whether we need to change existing policies, or whether we need to create new policies. These data are useful both for thinking about how to design more effective programs based on the information that we've learned in the past, and also to inform on whether current existing programs are functioning as we would like them to. So for example, when OSHA issues a regulation, an obvious question is, do the anticipated benefits outlined in the regulatory impact assessment actually ever materialize? When EPA revises a major regulation based on projected health benefits, do these benefits occur in the real world? And when the Appalachian Regional Commission provides grants to promote economic development in the Appalachian region, do we actually see this growth materialize? So in other words, these data will help us both prospective in designing new programs and retrospective in evaluating existing programs, and can help government with for both accountability in the programs that they're running and to do what we call continuous learning, continually making efforts to improve the programs. So I think it's clear that we've seen a growth and a continued commitment into the evidence agenda, and the slide that's on the screen shows a number of programs that government has, that folks have launched in the past, designed to examine various policies and to work on seeing whether we want to reauthorize these policies or modify those policies. Again, I think the work that I did on WIA fed into some of the changes that we saw when WIA was reauthorized recently, and it's now called WIA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And so that's obviously, I think, a good example of what can be learned. In this slide, you can see, I think this culminates in the creation of this the Commission and our efforts to encourage and further enhance our ability to conduct these programs. So, why was the Commission formed, or how was the Commission formed? A bit of an apocryphal story. Apparently, the story that I've been told is when Speaker Ryan and Senator Murray, if you recall, they were tasked with reaching a compromise a number of years, several years ago, when we had the latest government impasse at the time in terms of passing a budget. So they would sit in a room and argue about the budget, and then occasionally would take breaks and go out and chat about how both of them felt that it would have been an easier task had they had more evidence on the effectiveness of various programs. They agreed that that was something that was important. They discussed that with the Obama administration. All of them agreed that that would be great. They created bipartisan legislation, which was then passed unanimously by both the House and the Senate in March of 2016. And obviously the particular focus was on the use of administrative data to produce more robust statistics and to support this evaluation efforts, this ongoing evaluation efforts. Also an emphasis on how to better incorporate the results from these studies in the evaluation function of government. So a little bit about the commission. There's 15 members of this bipartisan commission. As an economist, I think I'm happy to say that there are 7 economists on this commission. We're not a majority, but we're certainly the plurality. And I would say we also have 3 other social sciences scientists, 2 lawyers, 2 people with financial backgrounds, and 1 computer scientist. Speaking personally, I can say that I've very much enjoyed serving with these individuals on the commission. I am a applied social science researcher, so once a month for the past year, we get together for a day, and the 15 of us get stuck together in a room, and we spend the entire time talking about data, which, at least for me, is an enjoyable thing to do. Perhaps not others, but it's been enjoyable for me. And I must say I've learned a lot from all the members of the commission, particularly the ones that have come at it from a much different point of view than I do. We have 2 people that have been focused, 2 people who focused quite a bit on privacy and the privacy community, and then 1 who's on, specialist is on data security. And I've learned a lot particularly from all of them. So we had a broad charge: increase access to administrative data, increasing the relevance of policy-related research done with that data, ensure that more people incorporate that research while in their policy, enhance the security and privacy of the data, all while in a revenue neutral fashion. So we have strived to kind of thread that needle. We'll see how successful we are. Much of our work has been focused specifically on improving how the enormous amount of government data already being collected gets used, and that's one of the focuses. Clearly, the government collects a lot of administrative data. They also collect a lot of survey data. One overarching idea we've had is, can we decrease respondent burden by making greater use of the administrative data? We've heard from a lot of witnesses on topics. We've looked for opportunities for improvement with regard to how data are collected or acquired, and how they're curated, how they're linked across programmatic or judicial silos, jurisdictional silos, and how data are accessed and analyzed. So one feature that we've heard a lot about in the current landscape, commented on by numerous witnesses, is the existence of laws and practices limiting the use to which particular data may be put. It is certainly the case that, again, based on my own research, when I wanted to go examine the impact of the WIA program, we had to go basically to each state and ask for the data that we needed, primarily unemployment insurance wage record data, along with information on participants in the program. And while the Department of Labor asked all 50 states to give us data, only 12 complied, and there was very little that the Department of Labor seemingly could do. Another example, I think a very good example of the difficulty, is the program that is the research that Mark's going to talk about in a bit, concerning the SNAP data. And hopefully I won't steal any of his thunder, but SNAP is a major government program, so it's not a minor program in terms of either expenditures or an impact. And in many ways, it's the exact type of program that should be benefiting from the type of rigorous study that Mark is conducting. there are amazing limitations that Mark and his colleagues, both at ERS and at Census, have had to overcome in using these data. First, states submit administrative aggregate data on a monthly basis to the Department of Agriculture that's just used for research purpose, that sort of produces aggregate statistics but isn't particularly useful for research purposes because you don't have the individual data. States are required to submit a sample of identifiable person-level data for the purposes of quality control. Essentially, are we paying out too much in benefits or too little in benefits? But there is a restriction on the use of those data for research purposes. In fact, you're just precluded from using those. So in order to conduct the research that you'd like to do on examining the SNAP program, you need to go to each state and get permission to use their data and have them provide you the data to do the study. You basically have to enter in an MOU with every state. And I know Mark and his folks, the team at ERS, along with the team at Census, have spent a long time getting those MOUs enacted, which means there are a long period before you can actually start doing research. It's that type of process that we want to, the Commission has been examining and seeing, are there ways to streamline the access to these data while still protecting individual privacy, which would enable us, folks like Mark and others, to do the type of research that they're doing in a more timely fashion. So that is part of what we've been trying to do. So we've sought feedback to our process and trying to figure out ways to improve the situation. We've had public meetings, a number of public meetings. We've had public hearings in 3 different locations. We sent out a request for comments. We got 355 comments back through this request for comments. We created a survey that was sent to all of the federal agencies, asking them about their capacity to conduct this type of research in evaluating their policies. And then we had a website where people could, or an email address where people could submit comments. What did we hear? Well, we heard from a lot of folks who gave us outstanding suggestions about increasing access to the data. I will say we also heard from a somewhat smaller, but certainly no less important and no less vocal group who wanted to limit access to the data. And so particularly when data included information on student records. As some of you may know, there's a federal student record ban. Essentially, the federal government is precluded from collecting microdata on students participating in educational institutions throughout the country, even though all 50 states can do it. And so, you know, there's certainly a lot of people who would like to see that ban in place, while simultaneously a lot of people who would like to see that ban ended. The other thing we heard a lot about is the capacity for agencies to facilitate and help with this, the use of administrative data. In our survey, we tried to figure out whether we thought agencies were capable of conducting some of this research themselves, whether they were capable of providing data that would be used for this type of research. While they collect administrative data, could they actually provide this to researchers in a timely fashion? And so that was certainly something that we got a lot of, heard a lot about. I will say it is clear one of the overarching and the primary focus of the Commission has been privacy and confidentiality concerns when thinking about increasing access to data. There was an effort in the mid-1960s to create a national data center. There was a commission formed, and they proposed a national data center, and the uproar after that was almost deafening, and that those efforts went nowhere. Or in actuality, those efforts ended up in further restrictions on the use of administrative data through the passage of the Privacy Act of 1974. So we've been thinking very carefully about ways that we could enhance both data privacy and security while also enhancing access to these data. I think one of the things that we have heard, particularly from our privacy experts and our okay, I will come to that in a second. So toward the beginning of our process, we developed what I call a set of guiding principles to sort of help us think about what we should be recommending. And I want to sort of conclude and wrap up sort of part of my this part of the conversation with talking a little bit about those guiding principles. And as I've indicated, privacy was one of the preeminent policies or principles that we were followed. Certainly we have all heard about the new threats to privacy in the modern digital age and the efforts that the struggles that government has had with protecting individual microdata. One understanding I think that we developed, particularly from our privacy and computer science experts, is that we've seen a sea change in both the techniques that we can use to protect data privacy and the changes in technology that we can use to protect data policy. It certainly, and when you look across government, there is agencies, there are differences across agencies in the privacy protection measures they adopt. So one thing I think we've learned is that making data privacy a more systematic concern of all agencies in government would go a long way towards enhancing the security and the privacy of the data that the government collects. And in many ways, adopting common techniques, common modern techniques and modern technology in data enhancement very possibly could allow us to essentially push out that production possibility frontier, would allow us to both simultaneously increase data security and privacy while simultaneously enhancing researcher access to these data and increasing the ability to use these data for policy relevant research. We also discovered that, or we've also talked a lot about better ways of communicating with citizens about their use of data. And I would point to the state of Mississippi as a good example, who's created a fairly robust data system on individuals in the state and their participation in various organizations and entities, while it also simultaneously significantly increasing their efforts to inform their citizens about the way they're using their data. Second principle that we followed is rigor, and focused on is rigor. And what I have in mind here is the importance of conducting research and evaluation in a manner that is well suited to the questions the evaluator is trying to answer. I think we all agreed that as a commission we didn't want to state how people should be doing research and the techniques that they should be doing, but we do think that part of this process has to be enhancing people's understanding of some of the appropriate and best practices in terms of research methodologies. And we spent a fair amount of time looking at the efforts that the Department of Education has undertaken in their What Works Clearinghouse in these efforts. We also focused a lot on transparency. It is important that government needs to inform its citizens about the things that it's doing. Given modern technology and the internet, this should not be a hard thing to do, and so we need to involve people in everyone from all interested parties in the conversation about the efforts that we're making and the use that we're putting data to ensure that we're all comfortable, and also informing them about the results of the research, the ongoing research, so that they understand the benefits of the research that's being conducted. Talked a lot about humility, not overgeneralizing the findings, and making sure everybody understands that this is one finding. It has limitations. We need to find things lots of different times in lots of different ways before we start drawing large general conclusions about programs and policies. Finally, we talked quite a bit about capacity and the fact that government, currently both state, local, and federal government, also often has limited capacity to help with these efforts, to understand the results, to incorporate the results, and to actually participate in these efforts themselves, doing their own continuous improvement and ways that we might think about enhancing that capacity. So what's next? We've got the timeline up here on the slide. Our final report will quite literally be released to the public within a week. September 7th is the rollout on Capitol Hill. I will be in Washington, D.C. at the time. For that rollout, I will say that it's in the Capitol, so it's not open to the public. Not exactly sure who you'd contact if you wanted to attend, but probably Speaker Ryan's office if you were interested in coming and joining us. They would be the ones that would have to give you permission. So what's next after this? Well, the Commission members certainly view this as a start of a conversation. We don't think that what we've done is the end. We are going to have recommendations. Some people may agree with, some others might not agree with. Regardless, we are hoping that this conversation will continue going forward. So, and we'd like everyone to be part of that conversation. So we encourage you to read our report, at least the executive summary, see what you think, find what you can get excited about and start spreading the word in your circles of influence, perhaps have a further discussion of these issues at more annual conferences and professional conferences. I know many people that are going to listen to this have strong connections at both the federal and the local level, and I hope that you would use those connections to continue the conversation and help others understand the value that these data have and the value that the research conducted from these data have. And so I appreciate you all listening to my presentation today. I look forward to your questions, and this presentation is complete.